Looters used a construction vehicle to break in before stealing goods from this electronics shop in Fairfield, California. There were similar scenes in New York where a number of shops were vandalized, and 4 police officers were shot as protesters fought with law enforcement in St. Louis, Missouri.
What we don't understand is all the destruction and theft, because what does stealing have to do with any of this? And so folks came down there just to steal, just to destroy property, and just to hurt officers. That was the purpose of their coming.
Some of the worst hit businesses are in Minneapolis. That's the city where the protests began after the killing of African-American George Floyd by white police officers. Shop owners were already struggling due to coronavirus lockdowns. They say the looting has worsened their plight.
Today was supposed to be the bars and restaurants open on the 1st. Tomorrow was the barber shops and salons were supposed to open. But now the grand opening tomorrow is going to have to wait a while.
Floyd's family condemned the riots while visiting a memorial on the site where he was killed.
If I'm not over here messing up my community, then what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing. Because that's not going to bring my brother back at all. I know. He would not want y'all to be doing this.
Instead, his family is calling for peaceful activism to fight against racial injustice and for legal reforms. Their demands are being echoed by US and international leaders.
We support the right to peaceful protest, and also we condemn violence and racism of any kind, and for sure we call for a de-escalation of tensions.
The entertainment industry is also throwing its weight behind these calls. Content creators like Funny or Die, Silver Lining and Viacom CBS are halting online content and tweeting with the hashtag Blackout Tuesday. Music companies like Warner Records and Def Jam, as well as talent agencies like Pantheon and UTA, suspended business activities on Tuesday. They instead plan to spend the day reflecting on social justice. Facebook, Snap Incorporated, Intel, Nike and other companies are also pledging to play a role in ending racial injustice. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is threatening to call in the military against protesters.
I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers to stop the rioting, looting, vandalism, assaults, and the wanton destruction of property.
But so far, his warnings seem to have further enraged many demonstrators. The violence is spiraling and jeopardizing lives and livelihoods at a time when many were already struggling because of the coronavirus pandemic. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, we're joined by Katie Gregory, who's in New York for us. Good to have you back on the program, Katie. Now, we heard there strong condemnations from George Floyd's family, urging people to protest peacefully. But despite that, we're still seeing looting and violence across the United States, reports that police officers are being shot in Missouri, and destruction of businesses in places like New York, where you are. Can you tell us what is the latest over there?
Well, here where I am, specifically in New York at the moment, the peaceful protests are just getting underway here in the city. Now, this is similar to what we've seen over the last few days, where they start off peaceful, go into the night, and then obviously we have these splinter groups that turn violent. Across the country, though, last night was definitely one of the more violent nights we've seen in these 7 days of unrest here. We're hearing tens of thousands of National Guard troops, around 30,000 National Guard troops have been deployed now across several states to try and quell some of this violence, and a lot of that is really targeted, as you say, at police in particular and the law enforcement on the streets. Now, last night was particularly bad. We had 4 officers shot in St. Louis. We also had several officers involved in shootings in Las Vegas. Now, the conditions of those Las Vegas officers are unknown. The St. Louis ones are stable. We also had a car rammed into a law enforcement officer on the street here in New York who was, excuse me, responding to reports of a break-in. So there has been, again, with more law enforcement on the streets, a lot of targeting of those officers, which has been widely condemned. Now, as I say, the peaceful protests are getting underway, and these stay peaceful during these daylight hours. And what we saw yesterday, even going into nighttime, those peaceful protests seemingly stay peaceful. It is just these splinter groups that are turning violent at the moment, and we are expecting another night of that here in New York City particularly.
Let's talk more about where you are. New York, as we know, is America's commercial and financial capital, and as you say, there is a greater police presence in the wake of this looting. But Governor Andrew Cuomo has been uncharacteristically, I guess, critical of the police force, saying that they're simply not doing enough to quell the violence. What measures are being put in place to ensure that more violence doesn't erupt in that city?
Yes, we heard from Governor Andrew Cuomo a little bit earlier here today. He said he's disappointed. He says that NYPD officers, put simply, just didn't do their jobs here on the streets last night. I can personally vouch for that. I saw several groups moving down the street where I live here in Manhattan, two groups not even followed by a police presence, in fact. And you can see the ramifications of what's happened here behind me. We've seen widespread looting here in the city. I'm here near the iconic Macy's, and each shop here now has boards up on their windows. They've even managed in some places to get through the boards and smash the glass. And I can tell you, those that didn't have boards before certainly have boards going up today, and we've seen that throughout the city in anticipation of the violence that is potentially going to happen on these streets again tonight, where we saw, you know, like I said, that widespread looting, people going into shops and taking whatever they wanted, and relatively no one there to stop them. So again, hopefully peaceful protests tonight, but as night falls here, we know that curfew's in place of 8 p.m. until 5 a.m, but they certainly broke the 11 p.m. curfew last night, so we'll see if that has any impact on the crowds on the streets here again tonight.
And just quickly, Katie, we know US President Donald Trump has threatened to controversially send in the troops in order to quell that violence. How has that message been received in a place like New York?
Well, here in New York, as I said, Andrew Cuomo has spoken today, the governor. He says this isn't a time for politics. And again, he's thrown that back at Donald Trump, who he says is politicizing this. In fact, President Trump would have to invoke a centuries-old law to put active military on the streets here of New York. And at the moment, Mayor Bill de Blasio is refusing to even take the state's help of offering the National Guard. There are, as Andrew Cuomo says, 13,000 National Guard troops on standby to come into New York City if things get bad. At the moment, Mayor Bill de Blasio is saying we don't want them. We are fine. The NYPD, over 30,000 NYPD troops, officers on the ground here can handle the situation. So that's how it's being received here. They just don't want this military presence at the moment, not even from the state governor, Andrew Cuomo, in terms of the National Guard. But you know, as I said, Governor Cuomo was deeply disappointed in what he saw on these streets last night, as was Mayor Bill de Blasio, and the failure of police to really control and corral those crowds and arrest those responsible.
Okay, Katie Gregory in New York, thanks so much for that update, and stay safe.